All right, folks, it's time for another edition of the World Edition. And of course, there are a number of things happening around the world and with the world and all along those lines. Of course, many eyes were on Milwaukee, a city that I know quite well. Was glad to hear the Marquette Golden Eagles actually mentioned at the beginning of the debate and all along those lines because they were actually in the home of both the Milwaukee Bucks and the Marquette Golden Eagles. And as a proud graduate, I was glad to hear that mentioned, as well as some of the other things that are featured there in Milwaukee, like the beer and a number of other things, including, as I mentioned, the sports and a number of other things that are out there as well. So it was definitely good to hear that as a proud alumni and all along those lines. And we're definitely going to get into some discussion around what was happening in that space and about the debates. I do see that we've got Debbie Peterson with us today, and I know that she's over there in the area of California. And of course, we're glad to see that she's back in California because she had been there in Hawaii. And I'm very interested to find out how that had gone and all along those lines, because I do know that those wildfires have had some serious impact. And I believe that was even a discussion to some degree in the debates as well. So we're definitely going to be interested to find out about that conversation as well. So there are a number of things that are going on in the world. So definitely we do know that the the Wagner chief was on a plane that crashed in Russia, according to their aviation experts and all along those lines. And of course, there is some speculation that that might have been an assassination, but we will find out as more investigation is done if that is the case or if it was just a tragic accident and all along those lines. So that is something that is going on. And of course, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran are among the six countries that have been invited to join the BRICS group. So it does look like they are trying to expand some of their influences, and apparently they have added six new members, and that is three of them that are out there as well. And the FIFA has opened a disciplinary case against Spain's FA chief, Rubiales. So that is something that we're seeing as well. And definitely there are a number of other things going on, including a possible tropical storm heading possibly this way, because Tropical Storm Franklin and three other tropical systems are out there in the Atlantic and all along those lines. So definitely that is something that we are seeing as well. So it'll be interesting if that hits. I know that tomorrow, I think here in Durham, North Carolina, where I'm based, we're supposed to hit a lovely temperature of 100 degrees. As you can see, I'm very excited about that. Not really, but definitely that is something that is heading our way. And then after that, it might cool down, definitely with fall coming and definitely with the being the middle of storm season and all along those lines. And definitely the Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived for the BRICS meeting. So he's going to be there at BRICS. I know that Mr. Putin is not there. At least he's got some representatives in that area and all along those lines. And North Korea is saying that a spy satellite launch failed and vows to try again. So that is something that is going on in the world as well. And of course, there is a lot of other things that are taking place at this particular time also. So, and like I said, in the United States, it was a lot around the debate, and a lot of people are saying that Vivek Ramaswamy is the winner of the debate in the sense of how he performed. But a lot of people are also praising Nikki Haley and others. And of course, a number of issues were covered, everything from Ukraine to definitely abortion to a number of other issues. And by the way, Rudy Giuliani has surrendered at a jail in Atlanta on the 2020 election charges. And I believe that today is the day that Mr. Trump is supposed to be surrendering as well. And South Carolina's Supreme Court has upheld a 6-week abortion ban. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. And it looks like X took 2 days to suspend the account of a suspect in the pride flag killing. So that is something that we are also seeing in terms of social media and all along those lines. And by the way, California firefighters are training AI to detect wildfires and all along those lines. So definitely there was a number of things that are going on in the world. We might get to some other things that are happening as well, including the heat advisors that are often in other parts of the country, including some that are in the Midwest as well in that space. So we're definitely going to get to that. And we do have a regular guest that comes on regularly with us and all in that space, but we've also got a special guest. So I'm going to bring the special guest on very quickly and all along those lines, because I do know that Kristen is involved in a lot of things, and she is the founder of Marked by COVID. There is definitely a situation that is going on. There are still COVID deaths that are taking place and all along those lines. So definitely it seems like you are the somebody that was directly impacted by COVID and is looking to a way to honor the many that passed away from that disease. So I would definitely love to hear more about your thoughts about this and what you are doing, because it looks like you are saying it might be a hybrid kind of situation where there might be a monument. We know that there are monuments to the Vietnam War victims, and we know there are monuments to those from 9/11, and there are other types of monuments that exist, but it seems like you are really pushing for this notion after there have been so many lives lost, not just here in the United States, but around the world, to honor those that have passed. And I've even heard some people that are speculating that while we seem to be getting out of the pandemic, maybe we're not as far out as we think we are, and that there may be even a resurgence, and that there might even be another pandemic around the corner. And that was even part of the discussion, I think, if I remember correctly, around policy in the debate, because I do remember DeSantis talking about what he had done in terms of opening up the area of Florida and all along those lines. But definitely, Kirsten, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and this project that you've got going on, and we might have some other guests that will come on wanting to get some of those thoughts as well. And then, of course, we're going to get to things around the debate as well. But definitely, I knew you were a guest today, so we wanted to honor you with some time also.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kristen Urquiza, and I'm the co-founder of Marked by COVID, which is the nation's largest network of people who have lost loved ones to COVID. And we've been working for the last 3 years for pandemic justice and then also remembrance. I lost my dad in June of 2020. So at this point, very, very early on in the pandemic. It was horrific. It was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. In our family. He was alone in the hospital. We couldn't be with him. This is also way before vaccines were available. We didn't know, have a lot of treatments in order to give them. And my dad suffered greatly. The sort of pain of that loss was unlike anything I'd ever felt. And I shared my story publicly to call attention, not just to my particular loss, but what was happening in my community. Most people in our community were getting sick, were getting turned away from the hospital. Our state in Arizona was in a situation in which they were having to make decisions about who was getting care and who wasn't, because there just wasn't enough resources, medical resources, to go around. It felt like we were in a war that nobody quite understood, even though we were all scared. And so by sharing my story publicly, it was an opportunity for us to draw attention to the fact that we were in a crisis, that people were dying, and that it was through no fault of their own. And we needed to free up more resources to be able to give people clear and precise information on how to stay well, how to keep each other well, and how to fight back against this virus. Since then, we have been working for remembrance, because as you've just been sharing with the audience, we just want to move on from this, don't we? We just want to forget that this happened. But I often ask myself, what would the last few years have been like had we actually known more about the 1918 flu, if it had been more than just one sentence in our history books? I think we would have been better prepared to begin with. We would have known how to respond in a way that prioritized saving lives as well as making sure that we could continue to advance, our economic priorities. I'll end my introduction with this. We've lost over 1 million people in the course of the last 3 years. As this compares to other things, this is unprecedented. Over the course of the last 40 years of the AIDS crisis, we've lost 700,000 people to HIV/AIDS here in the United States. 700,000 people in 40 years versus 1 million people in 3 years. And we're still slated to be losing upwards of 100,000 people every single year because of COVID still being here. This is something that we need to continue to prioritize and address to ensure that we are minimizing the loss of life and long-term consequences like long COVID to this disease.
Yeah, just one of the questions I had along those same lines is you mentioned the 1 million. I'm assuming that 1 million is just in the United States or maybe just in North America or all along those lines. And I was just wondering, because you mentioned that the policies have also impacted as well. Because like I said, I do know that during the debate, DeSantis definitely highlighted the fact that he had opened up the society and that was something that he was using as one of his accolades, that he'd opened up that area of Florida. I know that there were other places, including California, that were more weren't as open as say he was, and definitely they've had different kind of reactions and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, how was it in Arizona? Like you said, your dad was not able to get the care that was needed, and I know that Arizona has been in some ways a swing state and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, how was it as far as you were concerned in Arizona, and what your thoughts were as to whether maybe we even need a uniform national policy. I know that has been something that's been discussed by many folks as to whether we need a national policy. And of course, there have been attacks around Fauci and some of the things that he did in his handling. But I was just wondering your thoughts as one that is so much in the COVID advocacy space, for lack of a better term.
Sure. And to go back to your first question, yes, it's 1 million people we've lost here in the United States. The official record through the WHO for a kind of global COVID loss is upwards of 20 million people. So it's an incredibly huge amount of people. The sort of context-wise here in the United States, we disproportionately did horrific in comparison to other global nations of similar size and similar economic status. We were the worst, overrepresenting our fair share of COVID loss. And then the other piece of this is that this pandemic wasn't felt evenly across society. If you were able to work from home because you had a job that could pivot, if you came from a family with a lot of wealth and could take time off, if you weren't in danger of losing your job, if you didn't have children to take care of, this pandemic was a lot easier for you. What we saw here in the United States was that the burden of not only cases, but also death was held in communities that were disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and Latino, as well as communities that just don't have a lot of money or resources or strong public health systems to begin with. And that is universal across the United States. So there was really sort of two pandemics going on, both here in the United States, but then also globally, where other G7 nations far surpassed our ability to perform in the face of this crisis. Now, going to your second question of just kind of looking at the state-by-state response, thinking about last night's debate between the Republican candidates, this is something that we have been looking at really, really closely to see just how each state did stacked up against one another in a way that, one, prioritized the public safety, making sure that we're minimizing the impact on folks, as well as being able to kind of open up the economy again in a way that, continued to kind of keep us trudging forward. And we've seen that in states, especially in 2020. So take everybody back in time. I know it sounds like it's a long time ago, but in 2020, we had Donald Trump as president. He shut down the country, and we had, a whole set of states also completely shutting down their economy. So going into the summer of 2020, we had a set of states, including Florida, run by Governor DeSantis, Arizona, run by Governor Doug Ducey, who were very quick to reopen. And in some of those instances, governors were also preventing local municipalities, like the city of Phoenix, the city of in Arizona, from installing or from passing additional ordinances that would help protect people. Now, this is something that caused cases to unnecessarily spike, and more people getting sick and our hospital systems getting overwhelmed. Another place in which Governor DeSantis sort of dropped the ball in his pandemic response was that on the issue of vaccines. The state of Florida was one of the states that actually started getting vaccines to older adults very early on in a very efficient way. And then he himself started to come out against vaccines in 2021, which at the time, and then we saw that the rate of uptick completely falter. This resulted in older Americans, in particular in Florida, of which we know there are plenty, getting unnecessarily sick and disproportionately passing. This is something that I think is going to be a really important part of the 2024 election, just around the corner, of just how these states individually handled this pandemic, but then also the overall response by the Trump administration, who we know lied to the public about the threat, knew more than what they were sharing with the public, and worked really closely with governors to pressure them to reopen the economy, especially in these critical swing states like Florida, where Governor DeSantis was, in Arizona, where my dad was. And as a consequence of that, my dad died. So this is not sort of hypothetical for people like me who've lost loved ones to COVID. There were real consequences to these actions that unnecessarily resulted in people that we love, people who are irreplaceable, losing their lives. So, yes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to bring in some of the other guests. Like I said, I know we're going to discuss the debate as well. If you want to stick around for that, that would be great. And all along those lines. But one thing I was going to ask as I bring in the different folks, and definitely we'll continue the conversation with you as well, is you had mentioned the reaction and all along those lines, but exactly, because I kind of mentioned it, where are you envisioning this remembrance kind of space being? Because like I said, I've heard, and I think what I read from your representatives and some of the folks that are involved with the project with you, that it might be a hybrid model, because definitely we know that during the time of the pandemic, some of the people that were lost were not able to have full funerals. I know that there were some people that I lost during that time, and we definitely in some cases would do Zoom type memorials, and in other cases it was a limited amount of people that could be in attendance, so you didn't have the full amount that you would have had at a normal kind of funeral with your family and all of that kind of space. So I was just wondering, where were you seeing this going in terms of how it would be done, and would it be something like a wall similar to what is with Vietnam, or would it be something that is imagery and kind of the hybrid aspect that also involves technology?
This is a great question, and thank you for asking it, Mark. We've been working on establishing a COVID Memorial Day to be observed the first Monday of March. Our community has been observing that for over 3 years now. We've also worked with local cities and states, as well as the federal government, to recognize this day and sort of enshrine it as a day in which we remember, reflect, and honor those that we've lost, as well as sort of, make plans to do better for next time. We have passed over 250 local ordinances, legislation, and have bipartisan bills in Congress right now being considered to establish this day. But then as far as physical spaces go, we absolutely are working for a permanent memorial. And I'm really glad you brought up the Vietnam Wall Memorial. That is something that's been really important in my life. My dad's generation were the people that went off to war, and many didn't come back. We did the math to figure out what it would take as far as a wall would go to have the amount of space to put everyone's name on a similar type of monument. And we discovered that it would take it would wrap the National Mall in Washington, D.C. 52 times to have enough space for everyone's name. So we know it's simply, we don't have enough space to do that type of monument, at least at this time. And so what we've been working on is a digital component to pair with physical spaces in cities and states across the country so that everyone's loved one can be included. It can include a remembrance of them so that you can learn a little bit more other than their state, other than their name. And that there's also a physical space in which people can gather, because to your point, so many of us, myself included, were not able to have proper funerals. We weren't able to, if you were Jewish, to sit Shiva, which is an important part of the mourning process. For me, we weren't able to have our traditional Catholic Mass that we have in order to bring our community together to mourn the loss of my father. So these physical spaces are so essential to be able to have programming and centers for mourning. I'm really excited to announce and share that the state of New Mexico is considering a memorial park right now. We're also in conversations with the new governor of Arizona and the state of California about similar projects, and have started talking to our lawmakers in Congress about what this physical space needs to look like in Washington, D.C., because we need someplace everywhere. This pandemic, we saw unprecedented amount of life loss in communities, big and small, across the country. And we need something in every single state to ensure that those individuals who are still suffering have a place in which they can go and honor their lost loved ones.
That makes a lot of sense. I know there have been other kind of efforts like that. I know that there is one around 9/11 that I think just recently opened, because I did see an advertisement for that not that long ago. It actually might have been during the debate that I saw that particular advertisement. And I know that here in Durham, they just opened up the Freedom Park, which is a salute to some of the African-American contributions here in North Carolina and all along those lines. So there, and definitely that was created and designed by a major architect here who passed away not that long ago. Actually, I think it was during COVID, but I don't think it was because of COVID. I think it was that he had Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that. But Mr. Freelon is definitely a major developer, developed some of the stuff even in DC, like the African American History Museum and a number of other things, both here in North Carolina and around the world. And that's kind of like one of his lasting tributes that was done after he passed away. So I did see a salute that his son, who is a well-known rapper, and other family members were glad to see that done in the state capital here in North Carolina of Raleigh, and all along those lines. I'm bringing in some of the other folks. Like I said, we're going to get to the debate discussion as well, but I was just wondering, are you concerned? Because I've heard some people that are concerned about the notion of us not really being out of the pandemic. And I do know that happened before even you mentioned the situation in the 1800s and all along those lines. And definitely when that happened, there was the World Fair, and after we thought it was under control, it turned out not to be as under control as we thought it was. So I was just wondering your take on that, and if you were concerned at all along those lines that we might not be as out of the woods as we think we are, because 1 million deaths is a lot of deaths just here in the United States, and that's not even globally, and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your take on that.
You know, there's still COVID's still here. If you look at what's going on right now and wastewater data, you're seeing an uptick of case of COVID in that data. People are still getting sick. Hospital cases are rising, and people are dying. A friend of mine's mother just passed away last week from COVID infection, and so it's still very much here with us. And we have some better, we're in a much better place than we were a couple of years ago as far as treatments and pharmaceuticals and a whole set of non-pharmaceutical interventions go, and what we just know about the virus. But we still need to be cautious and be thinking about how are we managing this, and living in a time in which communicable airborne disease is part of our present moment. And so upgrades to ventilation, those sort of things are places in which we can not only reduce the amount of transmission of things like COVID, but also just be better prepared for the regular flu season and other sorts of communicable disease that go through. So we've also been really focused on, being able to raise awareness about the importance of indoor air quality, especially as we face other disasters like wildfires, the smoke inhalation from that. We need cleaner indoor spaces, and to be thinking about how to provide that for ourselves, our communities, and the public.
Hey, Debbie, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that because you're down there, you're in California, but you were in Hawaii. I think you were actually in Maui. So a lot of us were concerned about your health and everything during that time because you become a regular participant and a regular panelist with us. And we do appreciate that. I definitely continue to send you the invites. And whenever you are able to appear, I'm glad to have you on. But you heard that Kirsten mentioned what was going on with COVID. And definitely, I'm sure you've got some thoughts around that as well. But definitely wanted to hear your thoughts about what was going on in Maui, because that even came up in the debate as well.
Well, I'd love to talk about Maui, and but I wanted first to say I am so sorry to hear about the loss of your father, and not yours, Mark, but our guest's father. And I have a lot to say about COVID because I've been doing a lot of studying as I write for Psychology Today, and I think one of the things that troubles me is that as politicians, we do not go back and review our performance and say, how can we do better? And it is certainly true that other nations exceed us, do better than us on a whole lot of things. And if we're not willing to go back and look at how we don't do it well, we cheat our people. And as I look at the people that I podcast with, and probably 2 or 3 times a week, it's the only ones that I hear from who've lost relatives, and it's usually multiples. It's 2 or 3. It's a father and a mother. It's brothers and sisters. It's not just one, but it's always African Americans, and it's always Hispanic. There is no one in my immediate community, my immediate family, who's lost anyone. And so I want to do a poll. I want to say, of all of you here, how many of you, raise your hand if you've lost anybody due to COVID? Okay. So
I do know some people that have been on our show that did lose people to COVID. One was Ankit's father, who was from India. He died of COVID. And the other was Adam Lamperero. His father died of COVID, and he was a white guy, and the other guy was from India. So I don't think COVID racially discriminated at all. I don't think it's a race issue.
I don't think it's a race issue, but if you look at all of us, we're talking about one Caucasian guy who died, and many others.
Total evidence. I mean, you have a demographic.
So it's empirical. Yeah, I'm talking empirical, and so, and I love to hear that from Kristen that there are bipartisan laws coming into effect. And when I look back through my ancestry, I lost 2 great aunts to the Spanish flu, and I think then, probably as now, we went roaring into the roaring 20s after the Spanish flu. All we wanted to do was have fun and get away from it. And I think we are all sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. And if we don't go back and review it, we can't do better next time. And I think it would have been really helpful to have had more information about the Spanish flu. I think it would have helped us as a people address it better than we did. So I think that as much as we don't want to hear about it, we need to hear about it. And we do need to be able to mourn. So I really appreciate you bringing some of those figures to us, because I think it puts a reality marker there. And certainly the countries that were led by women were inordinately better at how they handled, inordinately better in terms of who survived COVID. And I've had it 5 times. So because I'm immune compromised, and I can't, and I'm also allergic to the vaccines. So I've just been lucky. I've been lucky.
Just really quickly, Debbie, you also are, like I mentioned, and shifting the conversation just slightly, but definitely still want to continue it and everything. Like I said, during the debate, climate change came up, and definitely Maui came up a couple of times. But I was just wondering your thoughts as one that just came back from Maui as to how we did in terms of our wildfire response, because that was a tragic fire that was taking place. I understand that many significant tourist places were hit. And like I said, I know that you're back in California, but you were there in Hawaii for at least a number of months, from my understanding, all in that space. But if you can just share with us some of your thoughts about how we did in terms of our response.
I have a second home in Oahu, so I wasn't in Maui, but that part of Maui is really important to me. My family has vacationed there for 20 years or so, and it was the favorite spot of my nephew who passed away about 10 years ago, and we scattered his ashes there. So we had a sense of loss as a family as a result. And what really touched me more than anything, and it's one of the things I've written about, was that the aloha it's a very real thing, and that the aloha that Hawaiians have given to all of us all over the world has come back to them. I've never seen a response as wholehearted and as quick and as soulful as what has happened in Hawaii. Within, I think, a couple of hours, President Biden was sending his best wishes to the Hawaiians, and he was saying, "I will come when the time is right. You tell me when you want me to come." Oprah flew over immediately, asked what people needed, got back on her plane, loaded it up, and flew straight back. So that was about 18 hours within 24 hours of going back and forth. But it was done with great sensitivity. And so I've been really touched. There were flotillas of boats motoring and sailing across the 40 miles of pretty treacherous Pacific seas to take whatever supplies were needed. They would go and say, "What do you need tomorrow?" And they'd bring it tomorrow. There were private pilots who were paying for their own fuel to go back and forth every single day with what people needed. So it was an incredibly touching response, and a response, very karma-like, in that the Hawaiians have given us so much and retained their that aloha culture for throughout all kinds of hardships and changes, political changes in their culture. So I think our response has been great. I was really impressed that the Californians sent, I don't know, 40 cadaver dogs or something. But and I think, looking at it more as having been a mayor and looked at tsunamis and wildfires, and this was a situation that nothing, not to say that they can't do it better. Of course they can do it better, and we'll all learn from it. And there weren't things in place that probably should have been in place. However, they were wooden buildings. They were hundreds of years old, and the fire was running at 60 miles an hour. The town is probably all of 2 miles long. They didn't have a hope in hell of getting out of there, and nobody could have gotten out of that. It was simply an incredibly horrible situation that was virtually inescapable, and nothing that anybody had done could have stopped those 80-mile-an-hour winds. And yes, they could have turned off the electricity so that more people could have gotten out, so the roads weren't blocked by fallen electrical wires. Yes, absolutely, that has to happen in the future. Yes, they could have sounded the tsunami alarms, and I understand why they didn't, because the last thing you want is people running uphill towards a fire. But at the end of the day, we still would have lost 1,000 people and a village, a town.
I'm sorry. I just want to piggyback on what Debbie is saying. First of all, I want to agree with you. Humans from Hawaii, from Oahu, from Maui, from California, all are coming in big time in support of what happened over there. Government dropped the ball. A lot of things went wrong with government, but you guys are doing an amazing job. And the government people should be held accountable. But there's a sirens not going off, because they had fire sirens. They're tested the first of every month. The water was shut off. Roads were closed for various reasons. People were safe because they went around barriers. I'm very familiar with that. We spent a summer there about 9 years ago in Lahaina. Amazing people, an amazing part of the country. But the government dropped the ball big time, and people should be held accountable.
Speaking of government dropping the ball and everything, and definitely we can go over some. I think Nick will agree with that, because our next show isn't actually till 12 and all along those lines. But I definitely want to get to the debate as well, and I'm actually going to pivot to something that I think that both Debbie and Kirsten may be able to address as well, that was brought up and everything, because one of the things that was debated quite vividly and everything was this whole notion of what we should be doing with our borders. I mean, Vivek came out very strongly, and there were a couple of other candidates that came out very strongly that they would send back speaking of the folks that are out there. I think they said like 7 million have crossed the border, and that they would send them immediately back and all along those lines. So that was a conversation point, and there was even some people that made the argument that we should dedicate our soldiers and our military. I know that that's something that Vivek brought up to that situation as opposed to the Ukrainian situation and all along those lines. But I was just wondering folks' takes on that, because that, along with a couple of other issues, were very much major issues within the debate. But I did remember, as I watched quite a bit of it, that was a major conversation point, was the notion of immigration and the border. So I was wondering if either of you, because I know that you're in Arizona, Kristen, and I know that definitely you're in California, and those are two areas that are impacted by immigration. So I was wondering if y'all had any thoughts about what you heard on that, or if there were any things that you have in your mind about that part of the debate.
Debbie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, please, because I still haven't gotten to the bottom of it.
The bottom of what?
The whole immigration issue.
Well, the thing is, in law, they have the statute of limitations for crimes. In other words, if somebody broke into your house 5 years ago and they stole all your artwork, okay, and then they left, do you know the statute of limitations runs? You can't prosecute them. Somebody can come in your house and beat you up 3 years from now.
Counselor, come on now.
However,
being an illegal immigrant doesn't have a time.
Illegally, there is no statute of limitations. This is a real simple solution. You impose a statute of limitations. So if somebody's in this country, quote, illegally for a period of years, never committed any crime, didn't do anything wrong, the statute runs, it's over, and they're here. This whole notion.
In fairness.
So Nicholas, let me ask you. Let me just ask you that.
Are you out of your mind?
Let me just ask you something here. So firstly, the reason.
Akil, bring in your dumb idea, please.
There wouldn't be a statute of limitations on a crime that's continuing, which is if you're here if you're there illegally, it's continuing. But let me just ask you.
The crime was when they crossed the border. The crime is over.
Are you suggesting that if you're there for long enough illegally, you should be allowed to stay, but with no status? So you're not a citizen, you're not a legal resident, but you won't be prosecuted or deported. So you should be allowed to continue forever to have absolutely no status. Is that what you're suggesting?
Hey, look, somebody beats you up and you say, well, I still have pain 3 years from now. Guess what? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but if somebody is beating me up for 3 years,
no,
they can't say, well, I first started beating the person up 3 years ago, so therefore the statute of limitations is running out.
The statute runs. It's over.
Oh, now, come on now. This is ridiculous.
Hold on a second. Dan, I definitely wanted to do Dan, but we have our guests and everything, and Kirsten was ready to jump in. Kirsten was ready to jump in.
Sure.
So let's hear from Kirsten.
Would be happy to.
Immigration is not murder.
I'm just very amused by this sort of, folly that's happening right now, because you take a step back and think about immigration. I am from Arizona. I grew up there. My grandfather came to this country without proper papers from Mexico because he was in a situation where he needed to help take care of his family because his father died in a tragic accident in which there was no compensation for them. So he had no choice other than to try and make ends meet. So this is an issue that I've been following my entire life and I'm very closely related to. My grandfather was very proud became a very proud American. He installed these values in my dad and myself. And listen, we are a country of immigrants. We came to this country, took it from the people who were living here, and have continued to build our economy around people coming to this country looking for a better future. I don't think that our immigration laws have actually caught up with where we are at right now as far as the need to move between different nations, nor the impending need that's coming because of the disasters that are happening across the country or across the world and will continue to happen. So we need to get our immigration issues straightened out and allow safe passage for people to enter into the country, to address the issue of children who are here and need to be able to have a status, to be able to go to college, and really turn the excitement of people coming for better opportunity into an economic engine that has fueled this country into the superpower that it already is. Us kind of pointing fingers at one another and sort of denying the fact that we are an economy built upon immigrants, it's just a lose-lose situation that makes us look ridiculous on the world stage.
Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo.
I do have a quick question before.
I actually don't think I'm crying. You're the one saying boo-hoo.
You're so ridiculous in your argument. Okay, so
you're the guy who's controlling us in the private chat.
Is a country of laws, right? And so there are immigration laws, and there are quotas for letting people in the country. People who come here illegally shouldn't be permitted to stay. They need to be sent back. Why? Because there's a line. There's a process to be here legally. Just because Grandpa came here illegally and managed to make it work is fine. But boo-hoo. Thank you for that. That was great. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your compassion. We are a country of limited resources. We can't take care of our own citizens, let alone these people who are coming here illegally. Our social and economic structures are not strong enough to take care of them and everybody else.
So Dan,
we just got downgraded. We just got downgraded
from a registered Indigenous tribe.
Work, Dan Worthington. They actually
Dan, are you from a registered Indigenous tribe? Because if you're not, then you also came to this country at some point as an
well, I actually happen to be, you can tell I'm Native American, can't you? Yeah.
So Dan, can I ask you, Dan, though, to be consistent with your viewpoint then? If the United States did not offer taxpayer-funded social services to immigrants, would you then be happy for the United States to have an open border?
No, it's just like your argument, Shaquille, about your family, how they had to apply, and they had to wait, they came. It's a question of fairness, right? It isn't. I mean,
that's right.
Law, you can't. We're one of the only countries in the world that permits this BS.
But the thing is that you don't. The thing is that America doesn't permit it, and I think that is one of the most insulting and demeaning things for the United States to go around the world and say that, United States, we're a country of immigrants, and we're happy, and look at all these poor people. We need to give them safe passage into the United States. Which ones? Only the people that can actually travel, that can actually walk up to the border. So all the people in Syria that are trying to get over, don't worry about them. What about the people in India that can't walk over? When they come over and they're there illegally, it's because they flew into the country. What about all the people in the Pacific Islands
they fly to Mexico?
They have to wait in a queue.
That's
exactly. They either have to wait in a queue to be processed, or they have to fly to either Mexico or, in a lot of cases, Canada, and try and get into the United States that way. So the fact that certain people are being preferenced over others, that certain immigrants are being able to be processed while others are not, is really insulting and demeaning to those people that wait in the queues for decades, sometimes at a time, like my family has, only to be told by people in America, well, we're a country of immigrants. Look at what a great job we've done. I think it's
so Kristen,
awful when my country does it in Australia, or my other country in the UK does it. It's a disgrace.
So Grandpa cheated and got here illegally, right? And you're the beneficiary of that decision. Economic benefit is not.
Well, I also would like to say that my grandfather from Mexico. This country was originally Mexico, and especially the part where
so poor baby.
So I think that
you don't have any right.
I'm so excited to
American
meet you, Dan. You're the type of person that we see on Twitter
cheated and stepped over the line. Your grandpa's a cheater.
To be able to actually have this conversation face to face.
Dan, to be fair, her grandfather probably came over when immigration rules were a lot different.
I'm kidding you, actually, but.
Thank you, Shaquille. That is absolutely right, too. There was a program called the Bracero program that was specifically targeted to Mexican Americans and people south of the border in order to be able to take the jobs that people here didn't want to do, like picking our food. People
working
here
in general.
don't actually want to do that.
So hang on. So on that point, though, Chris, on that point, Kristen, I just want to say something because that's an argument that still gets made today by people that promote the open border policies of the current administration in the United States. So first of all, when the Republicans had California and they were predominantly in charge of the farms, they were quite vocal and often actually threatened violence against anybody who would oppose immigration because they needed the workers. And interestingly, the workers were actually getting paid more than what the minimum wage would have been at that time. But when you've got workers coming into the United States now who and the justification for it is that they're going to do jobs that Americans don't want to do, another way of putting that is that they're prepared to do those jobs at a price that is below what the free market would pay, what the market would pay if you didn't have those immigrants. So if you wanted somebody to be a cleaner and they're not going to do it for $15 an hour, you would have to keep increasing the price that you would pay for that labor until the people in the country were prepared to do it. So what you're actually doing is you're bringing people in, they don't have status, they don't have, they feel like they can be thrown out at any time, and they're actually having to accept a wage and conditions that are far worse than the conditions that somebody else would be paid or would have to accept. That I won't compare that to slavery, but it's certainly an abusive way of treating human beings that are coming to the United States. And again, the same thing applies to the UK, the European Union countries, and my country here in Australia. But if we're talking about America, I don't think that this is a sensible solution, and I certainly don't think it's humane.
Well, it's human trafficking is what it is.
Hold on a second, both you and Dan, because that's exactly a question for Kristen, and actually Debbie might have some thoughts around this as well. You know, the last elections, there was people that were considered the I hate to use this term, but it was used by some certain candidates, but they were called the deplorables and all along those lines. And I'm thinking that in some ways we are painting the Latin American and the Central American people in that same light. I'm not saying that there aren't cartels and there aren't gangs. There are definitely those that exist. But a lot of the debate that I heard was about how we needed to go fight the cartels that are in control of these countries. And I'm not sure
that's for sure.
When in the debate today? When in the debate was cartels mentioned?
Cartels were mentioned several times during the debate. Cartels, Vivek mentioned cartels. Vivek mentioned cartels. Nikki mentioned cartels. Go back and watch the debate. Cartels were mentioned several times during the debate. I think Mike Pence didn't mention it, but it was definitely mentioned several times during the debate. But I was just wondering your thoughts to the ladies as to whether that was something that needed to be put out there. Because I know Vivek definitely said that he wanted to move us away from the Ukrainian battle in terms of the money and spend the money on the border because he felt that we could directly attack the cartels. And there were some people on the panel that were there in Milwaukee that agreed with that notion and everything. But I'm asking the ladies what their thoughts were if they watched it and if they thought that that is something that is a true concern.
I think the cartels are a huge concern, and I'm going to say California is out of control. I think some of the wildfires in California were started by the cartels because they weren't happy. They wanted to burn down some of the cannabis production that was going on. They weren't happy about it being legalized. And yeah, we've got human trafficking, we've got fentanyl, we've got just an unbelievable amount of horrific crime as a result of the cartels. How you battle it, I don't know. But yeah, we've got to tackle the cartels. They've taken over. It won't be long. I feel like California is already in some ways in the same state as Mexico, and that is controlled by the cartels.
Debbie, can we attack it by educating people on the horrors of these drugs? Why is there such a demand in our country for this?
Yes, that is probably the best way to attack it. If you can take away the market, then you take away the market, you take away the incentive to be here.
Well, the cartels are
absolutely unsuccessful.
When you say
in
there's
this
such a
country,
demand in
has
the United
resulted
States
in
for
the
drugs,
types
there's a
of
demand everywhere.
cartel activity that we're seeing not only here but also across the border. And the sad thing is, going back to what we were talking about a moment ago, the people being demonized behind this are just normal folks by and large. This idea that people coming from the South are are doing all of these different things is just disproportionate to the actual individuals versus the larger economic incentives around a few kingpins that are holding us hostage. And we're forcing this dehumanization of folks who are mostly leaving their countries because it's unsafe for them to live there any longer. That is a humanitarian crisis that we should be embracing with open arms, as well as our intellect to really figure out how to keep people safe, as well as how to keep our economy going.
Hey, just really quickly,
I'm not sure what's happened there. We're not used to the beard. Welcome.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to welcome our representative from Florida, who has been on the show many times before, and all along those lines, he's actually worked with Disney in the past and all in that kind of space. I think he's on vacation, but we've got Brandon with us, and Brandon definitely brings a different viewpoint and all along those lines. So, Brandon, glad you were able to pop in, and hopefully you'll be able to pop in during your vacation time. But I was wondering, one, if you watched the debate, and how did you think that your governor did in the debate and all in that space? And did you think that the South Carolina, which is just a couple of states up and everything, did well as well? And I was just wondering if you got a chance to check it and what your reaction was.
I did not watch the debate, so I don't have a ton of feedback to give. I just got back to the States from Bolivia, so I'm still trying to catch up on what's been happening in the country while I've been overseas.
Brandon, it's the same stuff it always is, but yeah, I'm not sure about this beard. I'm not used to seeing you with a beard. But give it a few years, you'll get the grays out like I do. Welcome back. Can I say, in relation to the debates today, I'm not sure that. I originally said I didn't like the idea that Donald Trump or any other politician wouldn't show up to a debate, but I think it was actually good that he wasn't there. While he was sitting there talking to Tucker Carlson, I think that the other candidates had a good opportunity to express what they wanted to express. I think realistically that, the people in the center of the stage probably, are the ones that are the most likely to get anywhere. And my personal analysis is that Nikki Haley, the only woman who was on stage, the Republicans have got to be embarrassed by that you've got, you can only find one. I mean, that really isn't a good
She's
look.
the only one running, Jack.
I know she is. I know she is. And I've said before that I would love to see Kristi Noem from South Dakota actually, make some sort of run into federal politics.
Yeah, she'd be great.
Shakir, who are the Democrats putting up as a lady?
But what I will just say is I think after listening to all of them and listening to where they all came from, Nikki Haley probably for me, I think is the standard. I think she's the most likely, if this is really just a run for who's going to be the VP nominee under Trump. I think Nikki Haley is probably going to be that person based on what I saw tonight. But I will say the only thing that would potentially hurt her, it'll probably blow over, is when she said that Donald Trump is the most unpopular politician in the United States. That may not be very helpful for her if a VP position is what she's trying.
Yeah, not very helpful at all.
And I will just very quickly say that in relation to Mike Pence, I did like to see him being a bit more fiery as opposed to being the sort of person that you listen to and fall asleep to. But he certainly looked much more presidential than he would last time he was on a debate stage with Kamala Harris and he had a fly on his hair. So I thought that was a nice improvement from him.
No, that was a big improvement in everything. But I do have a question for both Kristen and Debbie, and it actually comes back to one of the other issues that was discussed, which is a hot button issue as well. I actually felt that Nikki did well in that space because while there were some that were definitely going on the more far side of the issue around abortion and bans and all along those lines, she actually said that she would like to have some moderation and some thought around that and everything in that space. At least that's the impression that I got from that debate. But I was wondering, Debbie, you watched the debate and maybe Kristen as well, how you felt that Nikki did in that space and how she did in that space, which is going to be an important issue to many women that are out there and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about how she did, particularly on the abortion issue.
Well, I confess I was still catching up after being out of town too, and I didn't watch the debates. I certainly have heard a lot of good things about Nikki, and I'll say for the Republicans, actually in leadership right now at the national level, they're outstripping the Democrats for a change. If you're talking about just party leadership, so congratulations, Republicans, on that one.
Yeah, and on kind of piggybacking on what Debbie was saying, women in leadership is something that we haven't seen a balance on yet. So it's great to see a woman on that stage bringing that perspective, and especially about something so critical as medical decisions about a woman's body. That any one of us, I mean, I couldn't imagine making similar medical decisions upon a man's body within such a political and public stage. So having an actual woman bringing her perspective to the issue that's been so politicized, when it should be a decision between a woman, her family, and her medical doctor, I think is really important.
In your opinion, it should be a decision just left to them. Obviously, there's a big part of your country that doesn't agree that it should be a decision left just to women and their families and the doctor. But I think that this is going to be an issue that's going to bite Republicans hard in the next election. And they really must have, in my opinion, they must have a woman on the ticket going into the next election. Because if they don't have one, clearly this was an issue in the midterms. If they don't have a woman on that ticket, and I thought she took a very good moderate stance on that. As I've pointed out before, if Republicans are going to push the, if you've been raped, we're going to make an exception, then the obvious thing to ask then is, are you then going to prosecute a woman if she can't prove that she was? Is that your plan? I think Republicans are going to have to work out exactly how they're going to do this. And the question that came up today, or not today, in the debate about, are you going to make this a federal issue, or are you going to throw this back to the states? Ron DeSantis was pretty weak on his answer with that one. He didn't really want to answer it at all. So I think that those are going to be contentious issues in the next election, and I think that the people in the center of the stage, like Ron DeSantis, I don't really think he's got much of a shot. He's not likely to be the VP unless he gets the nomination outright. Then he's going to be gone. Vivek Ramaswamy, although he's my age, he's from an Indian background. I actually like the guy. I don't really think he's like a miniature Trump at this point, so I don't really think that he's going to get where he wants to go. And I think that Mike Pence, although he won himself a lot of points in that debate, I don't think that he's going to ever be able to convince the Republicans that they should put their support behind him. So that really leaves Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. And I think that Tim Scott may be too conservative. So Nikki Haley's probably going to be the person that's going to be the most influential out of the people that are on the stage.
I can see that. Hey, Sasha, just really quickly, Ukraine was definitely a big part of the debate as well, because there was a whole conversation about whether we should maintain the support to Ukraine. I know that you do this show, Ukraine, Russia, and China, on Tuesdays and Fridays, and are very much tied to that country. And all along those lines, there were some people like Vivek that were basically like wanting to pull the money out of Ukraine and all along those lines. So I was wondering, did you watch the debate and what your thoughts were around the Ukrainian part of the conversation? Because that definitely dominated a lot of the foreign conversation. There was another part of it that I'm curious, and I'll get to Brandon on that part and everything. But I was just wondering your take on that and your thoughts around how that aspect of the debate was covered.
I think Nikki did my job. And there's very little I can add to what she said. The only thing is, I would say I was disappointed in Vivek's performance, because he was touted as the most promising material for being a president, not even now, maybe 8 years from now, maybe 55 years from now, I don't know, whatever it is.
55 years.
I just don't think he's a presidential material. He was acting as a very petty, evil man who was interrupting everybody, who was just so annoying with his behavior, even his voice. It's to my taste.
Things were directed at him, Sasha. But to come back to Ukraine and Russia for a moment, I don't mention certain people's names, but one of the founders of the Wagner Group apparently has been shot down, or his plane was shot down and he's died. Did you have any comments on that? I just want to say I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but unless we see the body, are we sure he was on the plane? But I'll throw it over to you.
Well,
Yeah. Whoops.
I don't think that Russian government will make any comments whatsoever anytime soon. So they will wait until everything will just die down, and then somebody will say that well, it was the mistake by the pilot, and he just. Although it was everywhere shown that the plane was shot by a missile.
He happened to run into a missile. He collided with the missile.
Yeah, the missile was going that way. The plane was going that way, but somehow he changed a direction and he hit the missile.
It's funny how that happens.
An innocent missile who was flying somewhere, and that plane viciously hit that missile, and the missile was destroyed. So actually, the pilots of this plane, they have to pay now for the missiles that they shot.
Hey, the other villain in the room. Hold a second, Sasha. The other villain
a
is
story about when one Chinese dissident, he was shot on a stadium with 100,000 people there and so on. So in 2 days, his family came to pick up his remains. So they were giving an invoice for the bullet that he was hit with. So they had to pay something like equivalent of $7 for this.
Oh no!
Hey, Sasha, just really quickly, this is actually
Terrible.
curious to hear everybody's thoughts about this, but the other villain in the room, and it's actually part of your show narrative and everything, was China, because China was definitely mentioned several times. It was talked about how we are at war with China and the different ways that we are at war with China. All the candidates actually were saying different things that they would do to lessen China's control in the world, for lack of a better term, and all of that. I did find it ironic, and this is where I was going to get to Brandon, that I was watching some of the commercials, and there were some great commercials. I mentioned the one that was there about the 9/11 memorial. There was a education program that was a sponsor and everything. But one of the sponsors that I noticed that was there at the debate was TikTok. Last time I checked, TikTok is owned by Tencent. So wasn't the Chinese actually there in the sense of being an advertiser there as well? So while they were attacking China, they also had a Chinese sponsor, because TikTok was definitely there as a sponsor of the debates, because they were definitely there and had several commercials that were advertising. But Brandon, you're in the media space. You're definitely have worked in the media and everything. But I was wondering your take on that is, as I tell you this. I know you said you didn't watch the debate, but I'm going like, wait a minute, TikTok's a sponsor. I said TikTok a Chinese-owned company, or at least have some Chinese interest?
Well, listen, if their money's green, that's my theory. They may have been sponsoring it, but I'd be curious to see what outfits that the people on the stage were wearing, how many of them were either made in China, or the podiums, the microphones, the lights, the cameras made in China or other countries. So it doesn't bother me a bit. They can say what they want, but money's green and money speaks.
Brenda, you're talking about the outfits on the stage. Why are all the men wearing a red tie? Am I
Because
wrong?
It's a Republican thing. Yeah,
because they're Republicans, and it's
they
red
need
for the
it's
color
like a
of the
name
party.
tag. Yeah.
No
You got. I think it's
imagination check
required.
here?
Well, obviously not. But I mean, in the debates with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, for some reason, they actually switched colours. I just want to make a comment to our guest, Kristen, though, in relation to COVID and the government handling of it. I know that a lot of your comments were about the United States, but I'll just say one of the things that I found very frustrating, and I think people around the world found very frustrating, was not being able to discuss the issue online, not having a lot of our questions be censored by tech companies. And if I can give you an example of that, I sat here on one of our previous shows back when we used to broadcast more frequently on YouTube, and I said, here in Australia, we have different state health departments that are actually giving us conflicting advice to what the federal government is saying. And the federal government is saying something which is completely different to what the federal government in the United States is saying. So what does somebody like myself, who travels internationally, do? What am I? And because I asked that question, we were taken offline. We were demonetized for a week. Now, what we're now seeing today is, and I think you sort of alluded to this when you were speaking before, is we know that COVID's still around. We also know that we are still seeing deaths in those same high risk demographics, such as elderly people. But we've seen a precipitous drop in their willingness to get vaccinated. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they feel as though they were forced to do it before and that they weren't given the information. And so now, amongst a much wider group of the community, there is some mistrust. And people, for example, in Canada, who were told you can mix the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. You can have one shot, your first shot with one and your second shot with another, to then go down to the United States and try to jump on a cruise ship and be told, well, actually, we as a private company aren't going to recognize your vaccine, so you can't go. These are the sorts of things that were really, really harmful. I pull back on criticizing politicians on the left for having locked down things too much, or politicians on the right for not locking down enough, because I will accept that politicians didn't really know what they were doing and they were making the best decisions they could based on the advice that they were given at the time. But my concern would be if we were to have, COVID 2.0 next year, are we going to have the same sort of thing? What lessons have we learned? Are we all going to be able to discuss it? Are we going to be able to express our concerns, even if they're not founded? People who thought that the vaccines were going to, cause all these different issues, they may not have been founded, but surely people should be able to ask the question. I think that was the real damage done back then. And I think the fact that the World Health Organization has decided recently that they're not even going to continue investigating where COVID came from, that's just not on. Every country in the world was affected by this. So, you can't really expect people to have trust in government when government has acted this way all over the world. And I hope
it's a great question. And I'm really glad that you posed it, because one of the things, and Debbie alluded to this a little bit earlier, was the need to have, some sort of after action review that really sort of codifies what the true lessons learned were, what we did well in some instances, and the places in which we fell short. One of the things that we're working on with Marked by COVID is a yet another bipartisan piece of legislation that would establish a task force that would look at an independent task force that would look at those questions and be able to provide for the public recommendations, such as we did after 9/11, on how to strengthen our disaster response. And, the thing that was so tricky with COVID was that, unlike Maui, which was a horrific disaster that unfolded in the course of a couple of hours, this was a disaster, a slow moving disaster that continued to unfold and compound over the course of weeks, months, and years. And to your point of government being able to rise to the occasion and keep up with the development of the disaster, and our ability to coordinate across borders, as well as to get information out to people, we saw that, here in the US, we did a really bad job. Internationally, we didn't do as well as we could have done as well. And so, to your sort of forward thinking piece, like if COVID 2.0 were to happen next year or in 5 years, we are in a worse position than we were in 2019 when this started to unravel. One, because there's so much distrust in our government, but two, also we've started to roll back the little bit of extra, at least here in the United States, funding for public health infrastructure that we started to put into place. And so I think without an entire reimagination of how we work together individually and communally within the context of unprecedented unfolding disaster, we are going to be in a worse case. And I think that is something that is very unsettling for me, having gone through what I just went through in the last couple of years, but thinking about what's coming down the pike. We know that weather is getting more extreme. We know that there are more extreme hurricanes coming. We know that there are more extreme forest fires coming. These things are real. And we do not have the emergency response, the government response, the international coordination that we need to ensure that people are safe.
Can I just say, I don't necessarily agree with the last couple of things that you said about things getting worse and more extreme in relation to hurricanes and fires and the rest of it. But just to come back to the analogy you used about September 11. So in the aftermath of September 11, one of the things that Bush passed was the Patriot Act. Now, look, I'm not American, so I'm not gonna say whether Americans love or hate it. But certainly for me, somebody who's a reasonably libertarian kind of guy, 23 years later, 22 years later, you still got it. What's going on with that? I think that there's the risk that when you try to work out how to address a future pandemic, that you run the risk of taking away too many freedoms from people, as they did with the Patriot Act. And look, the health department rules and health department ideas would be, lock everybody down. Nobody would die from COVID. But what's not measured is the rates of depression going up. The people who are older that just gave up the will to live because they hadn't seen their family for a long period of time. The children falling behind in education, the increase in suicide,
mental health.
All those sorts of things have to be factored into that equation. And I think we run the risk of putting too much trust in the health department on, well, how do we just solve this issue, which is mortality rates in relation to the virus. And when you're focusing on that, you run the risk of not paying attention to all of the other things that could be at play.
And Shaquille, along those same lines, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to get to that before we wrap up, and we still got about another 15 or 20 minutes that we can go over, because like I said, Barbara's not till noon, and I can get to her by that time and everything. But one thing that also came up and everything was education, and all along those lines. Education was definitely mentioned. There were people on the panel that said they wanted to get rid of the entire education department. There were folks that said they wanted to crush the teachers union and things along those lines. And they definitely talked about the poor report card in terms of proficiency that we are having with reading, writing, and arithmetic, and all along those lines. And they were definitely even talking about some of the things that are taught in schools that might not be needed to be taught in schools in their mind, and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, Kristen, if you were thinking that, I don't know whether you have any school kids of your own, or what your thoughts were about that and everything along those lines. So education was definitely an important part of the discussion that was going on. And I'd also love to hear from Debbie as a politician. And I think you were on the school board at one point as well, or you had some ties to the school, if I remembering from our past discussions and everything. But definitely I'll start with Kristen.
Well, I'm a proud product of public education. I went to a public elementary school, middle school, high school, before I went to college. And what has happened over the course of my lifetime is that we have systematically disinvested in our public education system. And what we've also seen happen proportionate to that is our education. We're just not necessarily where we were prior as Americans. We have a huge distrust, not just in the government, which is one thing, but there's distrust in science. That is part of the context in which we started this pandemic, in that people don't understand basic science and how science works. So part of what I think is so critically important as we're thinking about education going forward is, listen, every dollar we spend into education is a dollar invested into our future. There's no better dollar spent in ensuring that every single child in this country gets a world-class education to be able to tackle the problems, not only of today, but of tomorrow. Debbie?
Kristen, a lot of the distrust in science and medicine, I think, came during COVID, when doctors who didn't agree with what the CDC was saying were censored. The Great Barrington Declaration, you have thousands of doctors who say, no, maybe there's another approach that we have. They were censored. That's why there's so much distrust with medicine now and science.
Yeah, because CDC lied to us, right?
There was distrust before that in relation to climate change and a number of other things, which, again, universities and colleges really have to be responsible for, because when you will deny funding and research grants based on the likely political outcome of what that research is going to provide, you've got to expect that people who are academics are going to say, you know what, I don't trust this anymore because there's only funding for a particular type of outcome, and so therefore we're only getting that kind of outcome. And very smart.
Exactly right.
And that's why there is that sort of distrust. But I will just say as well, Americans should be well reminded that your country, more than any other on earth, your country is designed, it's founded on the ideals that you don't trust government. Why 250 years later, you guys want to turn around and say, oh, let's trust government, is totally beyond me. Have you seen Washington? Why
Can't trust them.
I think there's a difference between government that is unchecked and an oligarchy and government that is actually a truly for the people and by the people. And I think one place in which we'll agree is that, and this goes back to something that Debbie said in the chat to me, oh, Kristen, you should run for a political office. I'm never running for political office. I come from a working class family in which I will never have the resources to have millions of dollars to be able to fund a campaign. This government is actually run by an oligarchy, a small group of people who have lots of influence and lots of power. And I think that part of what we need to kind of embrace as a country and as individuals is that when that power is concentrated within a few, that has disproportionate and terrible outcomes for all of us. And so the rebalancing of power for me within a government is much more desirable than a handful of corporations that have a very specific desire for making profit over the types of like public health or environmental or other sort of priorities that any working society has for one another. And I'd really
all those are
politicizing
corrupt as well. Most all those causes are politicizing corrupt as well.
You'll be pleased to know that you don't really come from a wealthy family because your donors will come in to help you succeed in the election. But let me just say, I have the utmost respect and admiration for Debbie, and if I have the ability to pick her up and put her in a whirlwind and bring her to Australia and put her in charge of my area, I certainly would. However, there is a limit to what I'm prepared to let Debbie do, and I don't want her sitting in the local council building telling me what I can and can't do in my own house or what I can and can't do in my own life. And that's where I think there is a disproportionate amount of power being influenced by both federal and state governments, and in some cases really small government-like institutions like HOAs. Just get out of the way. Let us live.
Kristen, just really quickly, I would agree with what Debbie said and everything because I've been listening to your comments and you definitely have some political future. And I can say that in here where I'm at and where Jacoby is as well, and I'd love to hear some of Jacoby's comments. He's been kind of quiet today. And all along those lines is that we have some leaders in Durham, North Carolina that definitely came from the grassroots kind of background and have actually done quite well. As a matter of fact, one of them may be our next mayor, Leonardo Williams, and everything, who is an educator and a number of other things. He is actually a restaurant owner as well. So definitely there are folks that are part of that working class. I think Jillian Johnson was a working class person, definitely has some more socialist leanings that might not go all that well with kind of Shaquille's politics and everything, but she definitely comes from a working class background. So I have seen working class leaders here in this area, some as community activists and some that have gone the political route. So I could see you definitely lending your support and doing some great work there in Arizona as well. So I was just going to say that to you also.
And you can start, you don't have to start at the top. You don't have to run for president, for Congress, even for your state assembly. Run for local office. That doesn't cost very much at all. So it doesn't take money to run for local office.
Yeah,
but wait a few years so that you become more conservative and get a real grip on the realities of life, okay?
Oh, I was born into a conservative family. I understand
Nancy Pelosi did
very well.
Your girlfriend Nancy Pelosi didn't, so
never happened to Nancy Pelosi. No,
must have been that crush she had on JFK. I don't know.
Yeah,
Jamie, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, we on the debate and everything because I know you watched the debate. You said that you found it enjoyable. So, Jacoby, what's your thoughts
on the debate?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought the debate was chaotic, uncontrolled, and there were plenty of individuals who all kept. Vivek was hateful towards everybody. Sasha's correct. He did tend to attack everybody. Nobody cared about DeSantis. DeSantis, even though he was in the middle, DeSantis wasn't the main target because his polling numbers are dropping and Vivek's are rising. So a lot of people are attacking Vivek because of the fact that his polls are rising. I mean, DeSantis tried to make a lot of very everybody tried to make a ton of outlandish talking points because that is the way the party is, and they were going for the if you listen to when Chris Christie would talk, or even when Nikki Haley said anything about litigation towards Trump, the crowd booed. Anything that was super outlandish, like when DeSantis said that he would shoot immigrants and the cartels dead on the spot, the crowd went wild and cheered. So it was just it was a circus, and there were the actual groupings up there.
Tony, look, we all know that you have nothing positive or nice to say about Republicans. That's fine, but the question I would ask you is, of the candidates that were on the debate stage, how do you think they performed relative to each other, and which ones do you think are likely to have some success within the Republican Party?
On the candidates on the debate stage, speaking just from the GOP perspective or the Republican perspective,
I don't think you've got one.
Huh?
I don't think you've got a Republican perspective, so we're asking for your perspective.
That's why I'm trying to answer that way, Jack.
Go ahead and answer.
So looking at it from a Republican perspective, the ones who honestly would have, in terms of where the base is, who had an opportunity to go up against Trump right now would be only Vivek, because he is still running that Trump card. However, Vivek doesn't have a shot because he's campaigning for Trump and to sit there under that vice presidential wing. Everything he said was defending Trump. He's playing that one note card.
Toby, did anyone who showed up last night have a chance?
In terms of beating Trump?
Or Trump's dead. Yeah.
No, because the way the party is, Trump is sitting at 30 to 40 points ahead of the closest competitor. There has never been in our history someone with that kind of lead to lose the actual primary. So right now, Trump is in the driver's seat. And unless, the party really runs away from him, right now, Trump is going to win. And there's no one on that stage that really stood out or separated themselves from Trump. In terms of an independent perspective, Chris Christie has the best independent perspective. He tried laugh all you want, but right now Chris Christie is drawing the biggest crowd from the independents and actually the Democrat Party. So from an independent perspective, Chris Christie is the best case scenario for the Republican Party. And if you, after that, are you looking at Nikki Haley? But Nikki Haley struggled last night. She didn't have a standing that she needed. And
that's not the analysis that's shared by anybody else that Nikki Haley struggled. And if you're going to say that somebody's an independent, I would say that the guy from North Carolina would be a little bit more independent because he's been out of the limelight than Chris Christie.
Well, no, Chris Christie honestly is drawing the most from the Democrat Party.
Well, Chris Christie's a rhino. I mean, he's pathetic.
But that is where the party is. The party sees Chris Christie. Anybody who says anything against Trump, that's the way the party is right now. If you watch last night, when they said anything bad about Trump, they booed.
That's not accurate, because there was a question that was asked to the debaters as to whether or not Mike Pence certifying the election was reasonable, whether or not he actually did what he was constitutionally supposed to do. Okay. And almost everybody on the stage said, yes, we agree with what Mike Pence did. Now, at the same time, Donald Trump's giving an interview to Tucker Carlson where he says, look, the Democrats ran through and they passed laws to prevent the vice president from not certifying, paraphrasing, from not certifying the election. So therefore, I asked the question, does that then mean that he was within his legal rights not to certify it, to send it back to the state legislatures.
Then
So
flip
Donald
that.
Trump has the opinion that Mike Pence should have done that.
Shaq.
Everybody
Here's
else
the
on the
question for
stage
you,
said
then.
that Mike Pence did what he should have done.
Here's the question for you then. Then they turned around and asked, would you vote for Trump? Everybody but two people raised their hands. Then
That's right,
continue to flip that. They asked other questions. One was about pardoning Trump. Vivek jumped up, raised his hand, and was cheering him on. And so he got cheered. So again, they know where the party is. It's still behind Trump. It's not about, hey, if they were to ask, Shaq, if they were to ask, would if Trump, would you be on the litigation side and arrest Trump? They would have booed. If Chris Christie got booed for when he didn't raise his hand for not voting for Trump. So again,
Hold on.
Party
Chris Christie got booed.
That's
Chris
why they're
Christie-
sitting at what was it, 58 to 54% still behind Trump. So we know where it is.
Chris Christie got booed when he first came out on stage, or when he was first introduced.
Why?
He got booed. Okay, because obviously Republicans don't like him.
Why?
Because
he's a creep.
But the second thing
because he's gone after
the second
Trump.
thing you've just brought up is about
No.
whether or not Trump would be pardoned and all those things. I can tell you that it's not just centre-right Americans or moderate Americans who have some issue with this. This is around the world. I know Tory people that vote for the Tories in the UK, that vote for the Liberal Party here in Australia, who will say to me that they don't like Donald Trump. They've never liked Donald Trump. They would never vote for Donald Trump if he was running for politics in our countries. But they feel as though what's happening in America is just persecution and a very politicized justice system. So what you're suggesting
that was part of the
is that
debate.
the Republican base is supposed to turn against the person who's leading their candidacy. Of course, they're going to be saying he should be pardoned, even if they're not going to vote for him. Of course, they're going to be saying that they feel as though it's being politicized, because what they're focused on is all the stuff that's going on Biden and Joe Biden.
I get your point, and I understand that. And the thing is, yes, there is political. There's a whole wing, the leader of the GOP, that whole party is still defending him, saying he's persecuted, pushing out information about that. That is that whole party's platform at this point. And yes, it's permeating throughout the world. So there are people that are sympathetic to him. So again, that is where the party is. They know that their leader is under attack. So they're protecting their leader through an information campaign.
If Donald Trump is correct that it hasn't really been challenged, and like he said in the Tucker Carlson interview, is the vice president supposed to just be a conduit for the electoral votes, or does he have the right to send it back to the legislature?
This is the problem. This is the problem with the information campaign.
If he is
it's
correct
because
on
you're
that,
actually utilizing their talking points.
If you could let me finish. If you could let
very
me finish.
Oh, God.
Again, correct.
If you could let me finish before correcting me, that'd be great. If he is correct about that, which is what many people, if you could just let me finish, Chitovi, and then you could respond to what I'm going to say instead of what you think I'm going to say. Okay?
Go ahead, Shaq.
I'm not a citizen of your country, and I'm not a partisan. So just wait. If he was correct about that, clearly that calls into question the legal challenges he's had in relation to questioning the election. Now, because he has gone around and said that, there is a big part of the Republican Party, their voters, that are going to be saying, hey, what's going on? And this is a very, very complicated part of constitutional law in your country that may or may not really have been tested. So clearly, it's going to be very dangerous for a candidate who wants to be a GOP nominee to sit up there and say unequivocally that this shouldn't have happened. Why would you do that if you're a candidate running for the party?
Shaq, just to point out, and this is why I was correcting you when you were
because I'm pushing talking points.
Now you're interrupting me and saying the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. I am.
So when you started off, you said if he was correct. That's where the problem is. He wasn't, and he knew he wasn't. So therefore,
no, he didn't.
Dan, hold on.
Jacoby,
You're so full of it, Jacoby. I can't believe
you
you.
missed what I said.
You
Well,
interrupt
When you
again.
miss what I've said, because I
Not
didn't say
saying
that I
right?
think he might be
So
correct. I
you-
said
you
that his
first told
argument
me
was
not to
correct,
interrupt
and that's what's
you,
going to
and I
appeal to the
did.
debate.
And now you
Hey,
jump
hold on
in
a second, because we do need to wrap up because it is time.
Yeah,
for
we
the
gotta go.
shortly and everything.
It's
But one
been
thing that I was
fun.
going to ask really quickly to Debbie, and I have a question quickly for Kristen as well. But we do need to wrap up and everything. Is Debbie, one of the things that was brought up, and it was kind of what was going on in this back and forth discussion, is the notion of the politicization of different departments, whether that's the FBI, whether that's the Department of Justice, and I have heard this from both Democrats and Republicans. But I was wondering, do you think that that is something we need to be concerned about? Because I know even your book deals with corruption, and if so, what can we do to address it? Because that was part of what was being discussed, was whether these departments, whether it's the Department of Justice, the FBI, or a number of other ones, even the ones around our health issues and everything, have been politicized. There was even people that say the Supreme Court has been politicized. But I was just wondering your thoughts about this, and is this something that is too ingrained in our society that we will always be in this kind of mode, or is there ways that we can get out of it? Because I do know that at least one of your books deals with corruption in politics and everything.
Well, that's a big subject. I think that the public perception nowadays is higher that things are politicized. I think we have less trust in government these days than we have in the recent past. I also know that it's really easy, especially when you don't trust government, you don't know what's going on, you don't know how to figure out what the truth is, what's really going on. It's certainly easy to make those accusations. And I think that a lot of times those accusations are made in the press when things don't go the way people want them to go. And sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not. So I'm not going to say that there's widespread politicization, or I can't even get that word out. But I think that, yeah, I guess that's really all I can say about it. I wouldn't say that it's widespread. I think that a lot of times I find that I'll encounter civil servants in a government setting who are sincere, really trying to do a great job, and often doing a great job. So if anything, I think we have, I lean libertarian probably. We probably have too much bureaucracy.
The way that I
Kristen, what were
see
you
it
gonna
is that
say?
there's a lot of polarization in the country, and these type of extremes, and that a small sort of very outspoken vocal minorities tend to take up all the oxygen in the room, and the rest of us are kind of left with figuring out how to move forward. So I'm a proponent for something more than the bipartisan system. I think that there's not a political home for many of us, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And we kind of have to caucus with whoever we are kind of closer to, and that creates not for a diversity of ideas. I think one of the things that we're talking about just in chat and live is just how these types of conversations are what American families have around the kitchen table, in which you have people coming from all different sorts of backgrounds that are then kind of putting it together and figuring out a compromise that nobody's quite excited about, but sort of works. And I think that is our bread and butter of what made this country. But whenever it comes to kind of some, there are also pure facts. There are pure fundamental truths. And we have gone into an era in which we are not quite sure what those truths and fundamental facts are. And that's one thing that scares me, because that is ripe for nefarious actors to take. I'm not saying everyone's nefarious, but certain nefarious actors to take and politicize, which really unfrails our country and also leaves us vulnerable on a national stage. And that is where our global enemies, can take advantage of us. And that's something that worries me.
Hey, definitely. Just really quickly, Kristen, because we are going to wrap up. Glad Brandon was able to pop in as well, and definitely Debbie. I hope that you'll be popping in. One thing I was going to tell you, Kristen, is that we love having guests back. You definitely added some different flavors, some that some of the panel have agreed with, some that the folks have not agreed with. But anytime that you would like to come back and join the fray, I think I can speak for everybody that we would love to come back on and share your thoughts and all along those lines whenever you are available. I know you're busy with the campaign to get this monument going and all along those lines. But you can tell folks really quickly how you can be.
A hard time. We'll come in and quiet him down for you. if Dan starts up again.
No, I really liked it. I really like Kristen. She's a nice girl.
But I do want to quickly ask you something though, because you made the comment there about most people don't really have a home and they kind of stuck, like just going with whoever they think they might be closer to. This is one of the things that when I went to, before COVID, I went to the United States, went to 27 states in the US. And last time I was there earlier this year, I only went to 5 states that time. It was a brief trip. But one of the things that I found back when I was there before was that most people, when I would talk to them, because I'm clearly a foreigner, they would actually tell me how they really feel. And they would also tell me that they were not prepared to say that in front of the friends. So like when their friends were like in the bathroom, they'd be like, oh, actually, I feel like this, but I can't say it in front of my friends. And I would hear the same comment from all of them. I'm like, you guys all agreed you don't realize it. Right. And I found that a lot. I also found that a lot when I was talking to people who would tell me they were diehard Democrats or they were diehard Republicans, that when I would speak to both groups, that they actually both agreed on things. But one of the things that I think is really sad to see in the United States is the incredible amount of political polarization in your country, where it's not okay that somebody else has come to a different conclusion, has voted for the other party. It's that whatever you don't like about that other party or whatever issues that you care about, the fact that somebody else has voted for the other party must mean that they hate or are against the issues that you care about. So, I really care about the environment, and so I'm voting this way. And if the person, my neighbor or my family member doesn't vote the same way as I do, they must hate the environment. They must hate women. They must hate this group or that group. And that just isn't reality. That's just not how most people operate. And I think that the US really needs to get past that and start to recognize how much more in common you all have as opposed to how much apart you all are.
And that's what gives me hope. I think that we actually do agree on, even, people in this room agree probably on 80% of the things. And then the other 20% gets really hairy and we spend all our time on that. And to your point, start to demonize one another and become incredibly polarized. That is absolutely something that, we as a society need to figure out, because it is not boding well for us. And Mark, I think you were inviting me to come back, which thank you so much for it. I would love to rejoin you at some point in the future. And for folks who want to stay in touch with what we're doing and support our work to build this monument, the website is markedbycovid.com. You can also find us on all the social media channels as well, at Marked by COVID. So thank you for having me.
Sounds great. You definitely added some insight and definitely added some great conversation. I know Lee Newton Rhodes had mentioned in chat how much he was enjoying you being on here. And I think Jatovia and Brandon, others have as well. So we're going to get out of here because we've got another discussion coming up at noon with Barbara Smith, and her show will be starting very shortly. And then we've got other shows, including Chris Greco, that'll be having his Worldview show that is every Thursday at 3. So there are a number of other shows that are scheduled, including Coco McMillan, who will have a musician on, because she is definitely a former singer with Gerald Levert and a number of others, and has a great show that deals with gospel music, R&B, and a number of other things. Marcus Anderson is kind of a jazz artist, as I recall, and all along those lines, but they will be on at 6 o'clock. And there are a number of other shows, including Billy Graham, not that Billy Graham, but another Billy Graham, that'll have a business coaching kind of show, and all along those lines. So definitely looking forward to some more great programming on the network. And don't forget that World Politics will be starting after Labor Day. So we'll have a show that will be definitely in the political frame in the evening time as well. So we'll continue with World Edition, but we'll also have World Politics starting as well. So Debbie, you'll be getting that invitation, and I've got your email now, Kristen. So don't be, I'll probably add you to the list as well. And whenever you can jump in, feel free to jump in. And definitely Brandon's in town for about 2 weeks. So he knows he's going to get the list for at least another week and a half before he has to go wherever Disney or those folks send him. Because I didn't know they had sent him to Libya, but apparently there was a show there in Libya that he was part of as well. So that's good to hear.
Go Brandon.
Yep. That Brandon.
That's so bad, Dan. That's so
that was
bad.
Bad.
We love Brandon Stewart. Come on.
I know. I like him. I'm just kidding.
Oh, that note we going to get on.
I just couldn't resist it.
Thank you. It's been a good show. Thanks, man.
Great show. We're getting ready to get out of here.